Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I trust you are well, and thank you for watching not just this video, but the entire series as I review every player that moves clubs via trade or free agency this off-season, tell you what I think it means for the club they've left, the club they've now arrived to, and wrap it up for us from an AFL Fantasy Supercoach and Dream Team perspective for 2024 and beyond. Today, talking about Zac Fisher, the former Blue and now the Kangaroo. What does it mean for the Blues? For them, probably a little bit of lack in depth of their squad, which I think they'll be able to recover relatively easy through some other off-season moves, which we'll address in a moment. But Zac Fisher's been trialled in a bunch of different areas in his time at Carlton. We've seen him play as a crumbing forward, sort of a dynamic half forward that pushes up across the wings, flat out wingman, and also a rebounding defender. And he's never really found himself completely established in any single one of those. If anything, he's looked at his best when he's moved this year into that halfback role and was allowed to use some of his speed, some of his craft, some of his dynamic decision making, which I think he's a really good decision maker as a football IQ. Some of his executions doesn't always match the ability to go alongside with the way he sees the game, but that's okay. He's still a young player and that can still develop, but he's a really smart footballer, really good footy IQ. And so I think when we've seen him in this rebounding role, we saw him do an okay job for Carlton. But in 2023, Carlton didn't have Zac Williams, who's arguably been one of their better rebounding decision-making halfbacks. They've got Saad, they've got Newman. They're not exactly lacking in depth in this area of the ground. And so I think for Carlton, they're fine in that area. We know they've got a plethora of smalls, and their wings already look really accomplished with Oliver Hollands and Blake Acres, let alone if Elijah, Oliver's brother, lands at the club, which at time of recording is highly implied to happen, but not yet officially through the gate. Even if that doesn't happen though, I couldn't see a position for Zac where he was going to be a regular part of the best 22 for Carlton. He was always going to be fighting to be in that squad, which is why I can see the attraction for him to go to North Melbourne, where at least for the next 1, 2, maybe upwards of 3 seasons, he's solidified in this best 22. The spot is his to lose rather than his to win. And so from a Carlton perspective, they lose a little bit of depth, but once an Oliver Holland's brother Elijah joins the club, it's immediately negated, let alone any other moves they make through the off-season. By the way, I didn't even mention their draftee in a Lockie Cowan, who got a handful of games this year. So they're fine. Those runners, those good users of the ball, those nice kickers, good decision makers, yeah, Carlton, they're going to be okay when it comes to the outside. From a North Melbourne perspective, I love this move. Like I said, for Zac, I like it for regular football. And for North Melbourne, I think it's a really astute move. They're lacking in a couple of key areas of the ground for me. One of those is some dynamics through the forward line. They're lacking through some options across the wing. And the departure of Aaron Hall, while he wasn't in the best 22 all year and did spend a bit of time injured, you can probably say the same for the recently retired Jack Ziebell. They do need some options that can use and take on the game well coming off half back. Harry Sheezel's position in the side next year fascinates me. Alistair Clarkson trialled him in the preseason during, kind of off-Broadway games and found this spot for him beautifully off half-back, and you couldn't move in there for much of the year, although we did see at times under Brett Ratten the occasional flirtation of a half-forward and a centre-bounce midfielder just to develop this young star of the AFL. And so where Harry Sheezel plays for me could open up the positional security for Zac Fisher. As a junior, Harry was beloved and contrasted to a Stevie J from Geelong, who was arguably one of the best centre forward, half forward, dynamic, non-tall forwards maybe we've ever seen play the game. And there are a lot of contrasts of skills, mindset, and ability to what we saw from Harry Sheezel. So if North Melbourne looked to play him more as a centre forward of the midfield, then okay, maybe there's an opportunity for Zach to play off half back. If Harry's there might not be as much ball, but he creates a nice decoy option. Equally across the wings, there is a role for him, especially if a Luke McDonald moves back into that defensive role, whether it be a lockdown or another supporting option to rebound out of defensive 50. So there's a lot of variable options here for Zach, and I think that's why he's jumped. Is there's multiple spots in the North Melbourne lineup he could fill, which should allow him plenty of regularity of AFL football. But as yet, the club, North Melbourne that is, have not yet come out and said this will be the position that we will play Zach in 2024, and they don't have to do that just yet. But for us in the fantasy community, his position that he finds himself in regularity next year ultimately will dictate the level of relevance he holds for us. Why? He's not a high accumulator of the ball, and if he's in the half forward line of North Melbourne, who are developing fine for a rebuilding club, and with the amount of assets they've now got at the draft table, my goodness, it's only going to get even better for them. But the reality is, young developing sides that don't get a high volume of ball and are in a rebuild generally don't score well, especially if they're on the smaller and non-midfield impact side. So for me, if he's playing as a midfield, as a half forward pushing up to the wings, I don't love it for Fisher. Like I said at the start of this video, where Zach has looked at his best is off the half back, and if he plays that spot, then for us in the fantasy community, we've got some interest. In 2022-3, this year just gone, I'm too confused about my years. In 2023, he averaged mid to high 60s across the formats. But if you go back and look through some of the data, his scoring was certainly better when he was playing that halfback role. Multiple AFL Fantasy and Dream Team tons, a high 90s and a ton in Supercoach. So in this halfback role, he's shown he can score. It's not crazy amounts, and it's not crazy amounts of ceiling 80 plus games, but in the bits and pieces he's got, he's shown he can do it. And at North Melbourne, we have seen under Harry and Jack Ziebell in the Clarko model, there is a scoring capacity there. So here's the thing. You put Zach on your watch list for classic and certainly for drafts. If he's playing as a wingman or a half forward or as a small crumbing forward, look, your interest in him needs to fade really, really quickly. But if Zach is getting regular usage off that half back line, and it is he or he alongside Sheezel are the key distributors of the ball and rebounders of the ball, then all of a sudden there's some upside there. It might not be enough in classic to warrant a selection, given again, he's already averaged at the mid to high 60s across the format. He'll be priced there, and you'll need at least 20, if not 25 points per game of value to feel like it's worth a selection in classic. And I'm not so sure, unless he's off half back line, it's going to be sufficient. Regardless, in drafts, he's a nice late stash. He's going to fly under the radar for a lot of people due to a poor average, where he's averaging under 70, and he's not a highly desirable pick. So I think as a late selection on draft day, because I think as a positional defender, I think he's a defender for us in 2024 based on how Champion data give us. I think there's enough value as a late selection to just stash on draft day and hope for the best. Now that might go up depending on the time in the preseason when you do your draft. But for me, Zach Fisher, I think Carlton are able to kind of replace him relatively easy. They'd be pretty confident they could do that right now with the stocks they have. For North Melbourne, he gives them nice versatility as a good outside user in multiple positions on the field. And for us in fantasy, it's all about where he plays that determines how relevant he will be for us in 2024. But do you agree or disagree? You can have your say in the comments on Zach below. If you're loving these videos, make sure you've subscribed to the channel, turn the notifications on, so as soon as these videos or any other video we drop during the preseason for 2024 lands, you'll be notified straight away. And if you'd love some additional bonus content, whether it be podcasts, articles, hidden groups, or a bunch of other things, you can join our Patreon groups. For just as little as $2 a month, you can get access to a whole bunch of incredible additional content. All the details to join our Patreon you can find in the description of this video. Thanks for watching. I can't wait to speak with you again soon about another player that's moved clubs this off-season.